Hi guys, Chris Dorry here. Today I'll be challenging the popular perception that strong draft combine results are an indicator of upside.
Today I'm going to start off by going through some of the best results we've seen in draft combine history. So firstly, starting off with the vertical, we've already got some results with some players who have gone in the first round who haven't lived up to expectation. So firstly, Aidan Bonner. He was a first round pick by GWS in 2017, and he's since moved to North Melbourne, but he's yet to establish himself at AFL level as a regular. Jordan Gallucci for Adelaide, I don't know if he'll continue on beyond this year, honestly. He's quite likely on the chopping block, in my opinion. So as another first round pick, that's a bit of a concern. Dean Towers, he was picked in the 20s in 2012 as a mature age player, but he's someone where, although he tested very well in the vertical, again, he hasn't lived up to expectation. And the critical thing with a number of these guys, Towers being one example, and even Gallucci and Bonnie, you can say to some extent, they're not massive marking threats. So if you're not a massive marking threat, well, having a vertical doesn't mean too much. Trent Crode, he's had a fantastic career, so fair enough. He's very justifiable at any selection, really, although he's had his injuries. Jesse Lonergan, he's another first rounder. He was a Gold Coast pick in 2012, but he's since been delisted. He never established himself as a regular, as more of a ball-winning mid, but even with the vertical, he wasn't able to make anything out of it. Kyron Hayden, great vertical, and you'll see him in the running vertical next. He hasn't, even though he was a rookie, and you don't expect rookies necessarily to catch on, but he hasn't made it. Spencer White, he was picked in the 20s, great athlete, but unfortunately he was never enough of a ball winner to be viable at AFL levels. So he was picked way too early, and in large part on the basis of athleticism. David Gordis, he was a rookie pick for Richmond, and unfortunately he never developed as expected. He rated off the charts in order to the testing, but even with that being the case, well, it never translated to AFL play, unfortunately. Looking next at the running vert results, Jared Brennan, he was a deserving pick 3 in what was a pretty weak draft, so fair enough. And he's someone who used his athleticism in games, so he can really justify, I guess, considering his running vert. And Nick Nat particularly, he's someone where he used it in games. So again, for him, it was a meaningful point of difference, where at ruck contests he could jump over rival ruckman, but he'd also take hangers around the ground. So having that marking capability on top of that really made it a meaningful point of difference for Nick Nat, and one of several reasons why he's been such a great player, but far from exclusively the reason. Cade Collar-Jasny, look, he was a pick 5, had early career success. His running vert probably wasn't much of a difference maker. He was more of a, I guess, rebounder out of defence. But unfortunately for him, he's had concussion issues, so among other injuries, so he's really struggled to just get on the field in recent years, unfortunately for him. But and then Archie Smith is probably another interesting one, where he's played some games for Brisbane. Whether he's retained beyond this year, I don't know. Given Oscar McInerney's going so well in ruck, I suspect possibly not. But look, as a late pick for Brisbane through their academy, well, he was deserving to go around there. And then again, being a ruckman, having that running vert's handy, where it's made him a bit more competitive, but without points of difference beyond just that running vert, well, it's hard to make it without something else. Looking next at agility, so Stephen Hill, he was a pick 3, pretty deserving pick 3. You could argue some should have gone ahead of him, but look, he's had a good enough career where you can say, look, it wasn't by any means an error in judgment. And he was someone where he was probably a bit speculatively taken, where you had guys like Daniel Rich who were probably a bit more well performed in his draft year. And look, I'd take Rich over Hill, but nonetheless, look, you can't consider Hill a failure by any means. Daniel Pearce, he's someone who far exceeded his draft position, so that was a great success for Port Adelaide. And then probably same with Elliot Yeo, where although he moved on from Brisbane, well, he far exceeded his draft position also. Van Berlo, he was a pick in the 20s, so he lived up to his value, if not probably a little bit above, having quite a long career. Ahmed Saad, he had some moments. So you're finding with agility a few more of these guys translate, but far from all of them. David Armitage, good career. He was a first round pick. So fair enough. He did well enough to justify that. But then we go down to Billy Schmetz, who I actually really rated in his draft year. And he was a first round pick to Geelong in 2010. But unfortunately, he never sort of established himself as a best 22 player. So here's one example where, look, agility, just as one athletic attribute, isn't just enough on its own. And same with Kieran Lovell, where he was a first round pick, although he was early 20s to Hawthorn in 2015. He unfortunately is another where he hasn't quite lived up to expectations. Maybe being a smaller player, look, there wasn't as much development to potentially come from him, even though he was very advanced as a junior. But here's another example where, look, he was probably taken a bit early, realistically. Seeing next through the 20-metre sprint times, Joel Wilkinson, who was one of my favourite players in the lead up to the 2010 draft. Just someone where he had a monstrous work ethic and incredible athletic attributes on the track, but unfortunately he's someone where, although fastest 20-metre sprint all time, dominated in the repeat speed, in the beep test, really did well in all the running events, and yet unfortunately just not being able to apply that, I guess, speed and athleticism in game, well, that just accounts for nothing really, because he wasn't someone where he could run and carry the ball or create meaningful drive. So that's something that really has to be taken into strong consideration with any athletic testing. You really have to be able to apply it in game, and that's the thing I'll keep stressing and coming back to. John Marsh, he's someone who could apply it in game, and that's why, given how late he went for Collingwood in the 2013 draft, that's why he's been able to have some success. And then come back even through the waffle and come back to St Kilda and again get another shot at playing some games. So he's someone where he's really got wheels and he can really run with it. So it was a useful point of difference for him, that's for sure. And Pearce, very quick. He's someone who's had great success and tested incredibly. So he's someone where, frankly, he should have gone earlier than he did. Other meaningful names, Jack Watts. Well, for me, it's less so a Jack Watts problem and probably more so a Melbourne thing where they just cut too many veterans, and without that sort of veteran leadership, I think that's really why his career hasn't lived up to expectation, even though he's been a reasonable player, but unfortunately he hasn't been that star that many of us would have hoped that he would have been coming through the draft. And then Nathan Freeman, another notable one, top 10 pick, but unfortunately for him it's just injuries where he really had the wheels, could really apply the speed in game. But look, if you're going to have injuries and you can't get on the field, well, that's not really anyone's fault, unfortunately. The yo-yo test. It really replaces the beep test of old, so the higher the score you get, obviously the better. Andrew Brayshaw, deserving enough pick 2 in 2017, fair enough. Other notables, Neg McHenry, he was a first round pick for Adelaide, but unfortunately he hasn't really established himself to date, so some questions around that selection, and whether probably too much of a focus was based on his endurance really, where he probably didn't have the ball winning capabilities and the talent of some of the others that went around that selection. So that one where maybe you could say a bit too much weight went into how he tested. Sam Walsh is obviously terrific, so fair enough at pick 1. Cooper Stevens, he's got scope to develop. He's a first round pick for Geelong last year. I think he'll come good with another year or two, and once that midfield opportunity opens up, I think he'll become a good footballer. Matthew Ling, he was a first round pick for Sydney in 2017. Unfortunately he hasn't really come on as many you'd like. He has had some injury issues, in fairness, but look, he was taken too early, and again I think probably a bit much focus was placed on his athleticism, where looking back at his draft year, I thought really he should have been maybe a late second, third round pick. I thought going first round he was the one real sort of shock selection that I noted on the day, where I was thinking, why is he going first round? But in 2017, if you really go through the names carefully, there are a lot of guys where based on athleticism, based on testing, they just went too early. Although one player that didn't go too early in 2017 was Aaron Norton. And he's someone where it's not just based on athleticism you justify him, but really based on performance, where he was playing waffle league level, absolutely dominating, and he only really dropped back a few selections to later in the top 10, only really because of his kicking mostly. But he's been absolutely terrific and transforming from a key defender to a key forward, I didn't see coming to the level that he's adapted. So well done, Aaron. And then you've got Stevenson. Well, he was rising star sort of in that first year, so he was off to a hot start. Hasn't really come on as much since then as you'd hope, but he's someone where I'm expecting next year he'll really return to some of his stronger football. So he'll be a reasonable enough pick 5, so nothing really there. And look, he's someone where he could always apply the speed in game, really run and carry, create separation on the leads. So look, given he has that sort of running capabilities, I'd be looking for him in future years really to push up more onto a wing and be that threat there as well as a forward. 2K time trials, so again, these are really new names given the 2K test really only came in 2017, so nothing much to see here. But Dylan Stephens, he's an interesting one. He was a top 5 pick for Sydney last year, so I reckon he's already playing some games and is already looking pretty good, so I think he'll have a pretty strong career. Chase Jones, he was one I was a bit surprised Adelaide went on as soon as they did. I didn't consider him a top 10 pick at all. And look, he looks like he'll have a career, but I just think probably there are a few others that could have been selected in front of him, honestly. Walsh we've mentioned. And then we've got McHenry again, who was the other really notable of those sort of earlier picks, I suppose, that were picked on athleticism. And look, Finn McGuinness, I think he'll be someone who will come good, but so he was a pretty good pick, I thought, for Hawthorn, and probably went a bit later than I thought he should have, honestly, based on some of his attributes. And he's someone where he can use that, I guess, running game, but he's also got a bit of power to him, so one to watch. With the 20-metre sprints, Wilkinson, no surprise to see him number 1, but if you saw him on match day, you wouldn't pick it because he just never showed it in game. And Brad Harvey's a similar case. He was second in the 20-metre sprint as well, and he featured as a rookie in his draft year, but he's someone where really it was based on athletic testing he was picked rather than what he showed in games, so hopefully that's a lesson to the recruiters out there. Other notables, Sean Atley, he was a late first rounder in 2010. I thought at the time he probably could have gone a bit earlier, but he's lived up to his draft position at the end of the day and been successful enough. Devon Smith, good pick early on, fair enough, he was worth what was spent for him. And then Kieran Harper, he was another I found interesting. He was picked in the 20s, and he was someone where just really high impact per possession, really used that athleticism in game, but the lesson from Harper was that he wasn't enough of a ball winner, didn't win enough of it, didn't win it consistently enough, didn't find enough of the ball. So when that's the case, you can be as impactful as you want, but if you can't win or find enough of it, well, sometimes you just have to sort of pass on them and really take that into strong considerations. That's a real learning lesson with him. Everyone's favourite, the beep test. So a few of the players would be pretty happy it got discontinued, but of course it's been replaced. Billy Hartung, first round pick. Being a small player, he was someone who was pretty established pretty early, but he's someone where he just never sort of, I guess, had that improvement in him to take another step up in his game. So he went earlier than he should have, obviously, being cut. Schoenfeld, he was a top 35 pick. He unfortunately hasn't come on. Caleb Daniel, really with him it wasn't about testing. For him it was about how well he played, where he'd get you 20 disposals a game, he'd be using the ball at 80 or 90% disposal efficiency. He just didn't seem to miss a target during the under-18 champs, so he thoroughly deserved on performance where he went even as that small player just because he was so advanced and so terrific. Hiscox, he was another top 40 pick, just never came on for Sydney, picked too early, in my suspicion based too much on testing. Really, he wasn't viable that soon. Brad Hill, he's exceeded where he was picked. He was picked, I believe, in sort of early 30s if I recall correctly, and he's proved to be well better than that. He's someone where, look, he's never developed the contested ball winning ability, but look, having his run on the outside, he's made something of himself. Hoskin Elliott, he was picked earlier than he should have. He was a top 5 pick, but look, he's someone where he's a decent enough player, can play a role for a team, but he's certainly no star. And then Sheridan, he was another pick he was a second rounder, and he hasn't unfortunately been able to establish himself either, even though he stuck around for a while, but he never found that permanent role for a team, unfortunately for him. 3K time trial, so we've got again some of the same sort of names there. So Schoenfeld, Hiscox, it's really all about their running capabilities rather than what they showed on the field that had them go top 40. Josh Kelly, fair enough, he was worth pick 2 in hindsight, or roughly around that mark, so he's been terrific, so you can't get too upset by that. Tim Houlihan, if my memory serves me correctly, he was either a late second or early third round pick in 2006. He was probably picked around early 40s, I'd say, but he never came good, so another that tested well. Tom Lamb, another. He's someone where, look, he had some junior performances on the board, so being picked early 30s was considered pretty reasonable by most at that time, but he's unfortunately never come good and never delivered on that, I guess, upside that many saw in him. Jared Berry, he's someone where he has delivered on the upside, and he's someone where, because he kept growing and he grew quite a bit later, that's why I believe in the case of Berry, rather than because of athletic testing, that he's come good. Nick Robertson, unfortunately, has never really come on. He showed some signs early, but he never really, I guess, has been able to take that next step in his development to become that regular player for Brisbane. The next set of data we'll look at is how some of the stars have performed during their draft years, during the draft combines, whether it be state or national. So first, Dean Cox, he didn't test, but he was someone where, coming into the competition, he was really unfit. He's someone where he very much developed his endurance later. So had he tested, he would have tested very poorly. So he's someone where definitely, had you tested him, well, that wouldn't have been a reliable indicator of upside. And particularly with the ruckman, it's telling as well, where we've had a lot of these guys taken as rookies, and not all of them would have actually tested well at all. Aaron Sandilands, although there's limited data, look, he tested pretty poorly. Even the beat test, look, not great for a ruckman, but I guess given his height, well, understandable. But yeah, no vert, as you can see. Nick Nat, obviously terrific athlete, as we've covered already, and a really across the board standout athlete. 20-metre sprint time, well, that's phenomenal for a ruckman. I don't think I've seen a ruckman test like that, and other than perhaps some Americans who have tried out as a one-off. Agility, again, if you look at the other agility times, really good from Nick Nat, but obviously you can see not doing the beep test and 3K, well, you'd suspect that he wouldn't have really wanted to try out, given even today he's not all that strong as an endurance athlete. He's very much a, I guess, fast twitch guy, so he's more suited to that explosive stuff as we see out on the field. And again, that's where the context comes in, where you really need to understand the player, understand how they play for these numbers to have any context. Brody Grundy, pretty reasonable results across the testing. 3.1 in the 20-metre sprint, look, that's fine for a ruckman. If it was another position, probably not as much. And then the agility, look, again, that's reasonable enough for a ruckman, although you'd probably like a little better. But then, again, you've got beat test, 3K repeat, so obviously he wasn't too confident on those. And if you tested him on those today, I don't suspect he'd test all that highly, though. Probably for a ruckman, above average, given he covers the ground reasonably well. Max Gawn didn't test. Had he been available to test, he would have tested pretty poorly at that time. He's never been an athlete by any means. Todd Goldstein, leaping numbers, not all that strong. 20-metre sprint time, not good. Agility, look, sub 9, that's okay enough for a ruck, but again, you'd want quite a bit better. Beep test, same as Sandilands, so nothing to write home about. But Goldstein's very much someone where, how did he develop? Well, he came from a basketball background, and I suspect he probably started playing footy a bit later. Let me know in the comment section below when he started, but I wasn't following the junior ranks when Goldstein entered the competition. Shane Mumford, no testing results, but he was drafted as a mature age. He's someone where he lost a lot of weight, but he's never had great conditioning, and he wouldn't have tested well in any of these categories, even prime Mumford. So in the ruck, well, how much does athleticism count? Well, if you're a Nick Nat, well, if he's using it meaningfully in a way where it impacts games, well, that's excellent. But for me, it's not a requirement for a ruckman, so I wouldn't give too much weighting towards testing. Key forwards, so probably this group is the really premium tier, but I thought I'd add a few more of the next tier names, I suppose, as well. just to get some more results out there, to get a bit of a feel and a bit more of an overview as to, well, if the best performers in the AFL over the last sort of 10, 15 years have tested well, and what sort of all that means in the context of everything. Buddy Franklin, look, he was a bit younger when he did his testing because he got drafted a tiny bit younger, so that's why some of his results won't be as high. And that's something else we can look for as well, where if there's guys, today it's more relevant if they've got a late year birthday, but if they're born a bit later in the year, there's potentially scope for more upside, more physical development, and with Buddy that was certainly the case. So looking at his testing, well, his vert numbers, nothing special, and look, he's not a real vertical athlete in the AFL. He's not much of a overhead threat or aerial threat, so yeah, look, it doesn't really matter for him all that much. 20 metre sprint, this is a surprising result. Seeing how he moves in game, you'd really think he'd be a lot quicker even at the age that he was testing, but not so. And then the real shocker was the agility, where of all these results, there's no one that tested worse for agility. Yet if you looked at key forwards across the competition, well, surely you'd think that Buddy would be the most agile across all of them, but evidently at this stage it was either he tested poorly or whatever the case was, but yeah, his agility is really a standout feature along with his ground level craft. So testing that poorly, for me it's just a bit of a weird result really. So look, it's a lesson in not putting too much weight in the testing. If Buddy's getting a 3.12, you'd think he'd be a sub 3 20 metre, and agility you'd think he'd be probably closer to 8.5 than 9.5, so very strange results. Beep test, not terrible, reasonable enough given his age for a key forward, and look, once you're crossing the 13 territory, you're pretty good for endurance, so that's not terrible by any means. And 3K again, fairly reasonable. So yeah, some really weird but interesting results from Buddy, but not the results you'd think if you really look at his game critically out on the field. So yeah, don't read too much into the testing, guys. Nick Rewalt, well, he's had a vertical, and look, being the marking threat that he is, well, it has been helpful for him in his career. So look, having that vert, being that strong mark, it's an advantage for sure. Having the speed, sub 3 over 20 metres, so he's quick, even nearing the 2.9 marks. So yeah, he's obviously had the speed, but then agility, not exceptional, but adequate enough where it's passable. But yeah, he's not sort of that sort of athlete, is more of a speed endurance guy. And obviously the beat test, good beat test for its time for a key forward, but he would have developed that further during his career as well. So yeah, Pavlich, he didn't test, but had he tested, I suspect he would have tested pretty poorly, not being so much of an athlete, and particularly at that time he wasn't really an athlete early days, so I wouldn't have thought he'd test all that well. So athleticism doesn't matter that much for him. He's just a great footballer. And same with Brown, where just being such a physical guy, strong mark, look, his testing would have been reasonable enough, but yeah, look, he's not someone where you would have picked him on athleticism. You would have picked him on performance and how he plays more so. So you'll see a pretty constant trend with a lot of these guys, where I'm picking a lot of the best guys in across a multitude of positions, where I really want to make the point that athletic testing is not the be-all end-all. Roughhead, reasonable enough vertical, probably a bit below average, but yeah, look, he's probably more of a ground level guy, still a good enough mark, but he wasn't sort of a huge, I guess, threat in the air, so fair enough. Looking at his speed results, I would have thought he'd be quicker than that over 20 metres. I would have thought closer to 3 seconds, but yeah, there you go. It shows that testing isn't everything. Agility, yeah, he's agile, and yeah, I'd expect a result around that mark, so fair enough. And beep test, yeah, pretty good beep, so that's reasonable. And yeah, the 3K not as strong as with the beep, so that's interesting to note. But yeah, Josh Kennedy, so he was obviously drafted at Carlton, then made the switch to West Coast through trade. Not a huge vert, or not a great vert at all, really. 20 metre sprint, I'm surprised it's that poor again. A bit like with a roughhead, you'd think he'd be quicker than that. where you look at all these names, and that's really the worst time across there, really, with Selwood. So you'd think he'd be a bit quicker than that, just watching him on the game. Because look, a bit like Roughhead, both he, Kennedy, they can create separations. So you'd think they'd be a bit quicker over 20. Agility, yeah, fair enough for a key forward, pretty decent. Beep test, good beep test results. So yeah, so I guess that helps towards how he creates separation in game. And 3K, well, not the best 3K, but yeah, adequate enough for a key forward based on these. Then Hawkins obviously has always been a beast of a man. When he was drafted, he would have been 100 kilos, just being so strong. So had he tested, he wouldn't have tested off the charts, and he's someone where he was just really pretty. He should have been good from the get-go, but it really took a few years for him to sort of get comfortable at AFL level and become that physical force and translate that size and strength to AFL play and develop his marking a lot further. So it's interesting being a bigger guy, being so physically developed, that he actually had the upside that he's had. So yeah, it just shows don't sleep on some of those bigger guys sometimes, even if they are a bit more physically developed. Jack Rewalt, I probably would have thought certainly his vertical would have been higher because he's a big leaper, but running vert, yeah, that's a little bit better, and he's more of a running vert guy, just seeing how he used to, at least earlier days, still probably a little bit now, but not as much, where he'd just leap and go for marks. So 20 metre sprint, again, I probably would have thought he'd be closer to 3, if not a little below 3. Agility, look, good agility, and that's fairly representative of what you see in game. Beep test, I probably wouldn't have thought he'd be there. I might have thought he'd be a tiny bit lower, but look, fairly reasonable. 3K, yeah, I wasn't expecting such a strong time, so about as expected. Repeat speed, I would have thought repeat sprint he would have got a bit better than that, but yeah, look, it's hard to know, and he might have developed that a bit later. So not an outstanding athlete, but had some reasonable athletic attributes. Cloak, unfortunately, no testing data available. Early career, he was more athletic than he was later in the career, where he just became a big bustling marking type, but he's always had elite endurance, so that was always athletically his point of difference and where he was strong. McGovern, he's someone where he was drafted as really an overweight key defender, to put it plainly, so he's someone where he's obviously just come on over the years in leaps and bounds, and just because he's a natural footballer and he's so great in that sort of sense, that's how he's become so good, where he just reads it so well, such a strong mark. So as a key defender, you don't have to be an athlete. And really McGovern's a sort of model that I'd be looking to in either recruiting key defenders, or in potentially even transforming some key forwards into key defenders, where if they read it like that, mark it like that, and if they're not necessarily all that athletic, I think you can really put them behind the ball and make him into a similar type of player, because McGovern's not an exceptional athlete in any regard. He's not fast, he's not much of a leaper, and he doesn't have the endurance. So Alex Rance, pretty good athlete, decent enough leaper without being leaping out of the gym. 20 metre sprint, would have thought he'd be quicker again. A lot of the key position players you think of as really sub 3s, where they're usually pretty quick, particularly over that short distance, but not so with Rance, just as with a lot of the others, which is quite interesting. Agility, reasonable enough. Beep test, pretty decent result, given he's a key positioner. 3K, pretty good result. Repeat, again, decent enough. So yeah, look, Rance has always been an athlete, and really his problem was just he was a terrible kick early days, so he very much developed over the years and became really one of the elite defenders. Brian Lake, he was known as Brian Harris at the time, if anyone has the testing data and they need to look back at that. But and look, he tried out the year before and his results were a lot weaker, where if you looked at his vertical results, running verts, it was a lot weaker. Beep test, not a good result, being a 0.1, so, 11.1, so not a great result. But yeah, look, he's always been a size and strength, strong marking type. He'd win one-on-ones, take one-on-one marks. So I'm not too surprised to not see him test in 20 metres agility, because he just wouldn't have gone well at all in the testing. And look, he was a late pick, so being a late pick, not being so advanced necessarily, but then really coming on as a physical beast, well, it shows again you don't have to necessarily be an athlete to be a great key defender. McFarlane, on the other hand, he was an athlete, terrific athlete, had hops, he was quick, but didn't test. So it's a bit of context there. Harry Taylor, he was picked a few years later as a mature ager, but obviously being picked those few years later, well, you can see his testing data's really quite strong. Good in the leaping categories, good 20 metre time. This is sort of what you'd want from a key position player typically. So obviously very quick. Agility, pretty decent, but then beep test, great beep test results. So So having both that and having the performances on the board in the waffle at the time where he was recruited from, well, it's no wonder that he's had the success. Harris Andrews, he was picked later on as an academy pick for Brisbane, and he's someone where he developed a lot later, being sort of a 200 centimetre guy. Even when drafted, people were sort of feeling it was a bit speculative, but it's more the late development for me that saw him really come good. Testing, reasonable enough for vertical given he's more of a tall guy. 20 metre sprint, I would have thought he'd be quicker than that. He's quick in games, so I think he's probably developed that over time. Agility, look, again, being so tall, fair enough that it's not sort of closer to the 8.5 mark. That's a bit nicer, but look, reasonable enough. Beep test, decent enough beep test, again, given sort of that height being where he was at in his development. 3K time, that's a good 3K time, so he's obviously got that endurance base even then. And then repeat speed, suboptimal, but you'd want probably closer to just 25 flat, but reasonable enough again. So Ablett, no testing data, but he was someone where very much, he wasn't ever an athlete, but he was someone where you put the ball in his hands, it's match day, that's when he's really going to, I guess, get going, get running, look a bit quicker. So he's really a fast of mind player, and that's something that doesn't come out in testing, where if he did a 20 metre sprint, he probably wouldn't be a sub 3, and he probably wouldn't be a standout in any particular category, but he's just a gun footballer, knows how to win it, knows where to go, and he's just someone where he gets competitive once you bounce the ball. So you don't have to be an athlete. Judd, look, he would have dominated in the 20 metre sprint, repeat speed or repeat sprint had he done that. Beep test, fantastic result, hitting 15, second highest amongst this group, so obviously that's a great result. So but yeah, he had shoulder issues coming into the league, which saw him drop to pick 3 in his draft years. So that played a part there in him going later than he probably should have or could have potentially otherwise. Danger, he was another where he was picked at a younger age, so some of the testing data he would have improved in the year following on from there. So verticals, he's got hops and he's shown it a little bit in game, but it's more his speed that really in game stands out the most. And being sub 3, look, you'd be shocked if he wasn't sub 3 and nearing that sort of 2.9 mark. So and I reckon he would have passed he'd get below 2.9 sort of peak danger. So great athlete, but he's someone where he applies it in game. He has the ball winning capabilities, and mix that with the explosiveness and the capacity to use that explosiveness, well, that's the absolute key. Agility, okay enough, but not exceptional. Beep test, probably better than I would have thought, given he was someone where he was very much a forward early days and really had to build up his endurance to be able to push through the midfield more. 3K, not a great 3K time. Repeat sprint, well, this is where he really comes into his own, where you put the repeat sprint, you get the 20 metre, and that's why he can really explode. And again, this is a case of where the testing really gives context behind what you see in game. So that's more the thing I would recommend focusing on, the context and whether that attribute really counts in that way. Danger, not much of a leaper, fair enough. You wouldn't expect him to be, but getting sub 2.9 in the 20 metre sprint, well, he was really quite explosive early days, and he's still got a little bit, but not as much as he did then. Agility, great agility times, so obviously a very fast twitch athlete, but then he obviously put on size, got a lot stronger. Beep test, again, pretty reasonable beat test, a bit like with Danger. So it's surprising that it really took so long for him to go from a mostly forward to become that full-time mid. But yet obviously took him a while to further his endurance. Repeat speed, again, pretty good repeat speed, being sort of sub 25, so that's pretty good. Nat Fyfe, he was someone where he was very much a late developer, where really in his first year of footy, that's when he put on size, and he's someone where he kept growing a few centimetres as well, where when he was drafted, he was just a medium marking forward, could take a lot of marks in the forward 50, but look, I never saw the ball winning capabilities that he's developed during his career, so anyone that picked that, well, bravo, but I can't claim to have in 2009, so yeah, looking at the verts, nothing exceptional. If I was looking at him as a marking medium forward, which I was at the time, I probably would have hoped for more. But yeah, look, he's obviously a marking weapon. Speed, you'd probably hope he'd be closer to 3. But yeah, look, that's probably reasonable and sort of as his game looks. Agility, about what you'd expect. But beat test, a good beat test result. So obviously he's always had that aerobic capacity to be pretty reasonable in that regard. And then you've got repeat sprint, about what you'd expect from Fyfe. But yeah, he's an interesting case. So not someone you'd pick as an athlete necessarily, not absolutely outstanding. Really the beat test is a good result, but beyond that you wouldn't sort of be saying, oh, pick him because he's an athlete. You pick him because he's a sensational footballer, and he probably wasn't in his draft year. He couldn't kick a goal from 10, 15 metres out. He'd be spraying it to a side, which made me a bit cautious with him in 2009. But obviously the development since has been phenomenal, and that's what's seen him become who he's become today. Pendles, not a huge leaper, but yeah, look, he's not much of a marking threat in games, so that's understandable. 20-metre sprint, he's never actually been able to get sub 3. I know for a few years there he was really trying long and hard to get beyond that mark, but he's never improved his speed beyond that, which is interesting. But Pendles is very much an example of his fast in game, where just quick sort of mind to body connection, and I think that's really the key, where that mind to body connection really doesn't show up in the testing necessarily. But yeah, certainly Pendlebury, a lot of the Indigenous players particularly have that mind-to-body connection, where you'll see the likes of, say, a Buddy or a Cyril. They might not test as well, sort of, I guess, in the athletic testing, but they're people where, look, in-game, they'll really be able to, I guess, apply that athleticism and that mind-to-body connection in a way that others just don't have that capability. But agility, look, that's where Pendlebury sort of stands out, and look, great result for Pendlebury there. And interesting with Pendlebury, although he went pick 5, he was more seen as a later first round pick. So good on Derek Hine for picking him that early, because not many at the time of that draft were really picking it. Beat test, pretty good beat test result. 3K, reasonable enough. But yeah, if you look at him athletically, look, it's really just the agility that he really stands out. And look, he uses it in game, but it's more so that he slows down sort of the time around him, where he's just, I guess, so comfortable with ball in hand and just has that time, I guess, just because he sort of thinks before what he's going to do, and he just knows what he's going to do before anyone can react. So that's why Pendlebury really in-game can use that agility so well. And although others might test better for agility, they can't necessarily do the same things in-game as Pendles can. But Selwood, yeah, it doesn't test off the charts. Vertical, you wouldn't expect to be all that high, although it's pretty reasonable here. But yeah, look, he could take some marks here and there, and even for a few years there, he had a few opportunities forward of centre and got some goals and took a few marks. 20-metre sprint, look, that's a pretty slow time, so Selwood's an example of you don't need to be at all quick to, I guess, be able to make it at AFL level. So there's more to it than just being an elite sort of speed athlete. Agility though, good agility result there. So yeah, so that's something. Beat test, reasonable enough beat test result without being all that strong. And 3K time, look, sub 11, so reasonable enough. And then repeat sprint, well, okay enough, but for a mid you'd probably want a little better than that ideally. So yeah, look, although agility good, speed's poor, so would you pick Selwood as an athlete? No, you'd pick him because he's an amazing footballer. Sam Mitchell, he was picked sort of as a mature ager coming out of the VFL for Box Hill, I believe it was. But yeah, obviously sensational footballer, but he was someone where he wasn't picked for all those years, even though he was playing great football, but it was because he was seen as someone who wasn't athletically gifted enough. But if you watch him in game, and look, had he tested, his testing, I'm sure, would have come out pretty poorly. But yeah, look, in game, if you watch how he moves, his mobility, his athleticism, it doesn't matter because he's so skilled. He has that, I guess, mind-to-body connection, not quite like a Pendlebury, but he's still quick enough where, look, he's absolutely fine. So, and look, he's become a great, even though he didn't have that athleticism. So again, you can be a great footballer, and Swan is another example of that as well, where, look, he didn't test, and look, had he tested, he would have tested pretty poorly, I would imagine. He was never much of an athlete. Look, over the years, his repeat sprint has become really good, and he's more of that sort of burst athlete, but I think he more so developed that at Collingwood rather than always necessarily had that. Maybe he had a little bit of that, but there would have been a few areas I think he would have been a little bit deficient on athletically, so I don't think he would have stood out. But he's someone where you draft him as a footballer because at least he became a great footballer over time. He wasn't great when he was drafted, but he developed into that without necessarily having that elite anything athletic at the time. Hodge, he was one drafted a bit younger, so you have to bear that in mind when looking at the numbers. Vertical, nothing exceptional, but running vert, pretty decent, so that's okay. 20 metre sprint, you'd expect him to be sub 3. Early career, he was very explosive before he had injuries. Agility, reasonable enough. Beat test, below average, but look, he was a bit younger, so recruiters would have kept that in mind. And same with 3K, we're not outstanding there. So Brendan Goddard, athletically, again, he was a younger one, so again, you have to keep that in mind, where when they're younger, they're not going to test as well, but some of them can still test pretty well in some categories. Verts, running verts, well, Goddard actually, he could take some marks, he could get up there, so that probably improved a bit, but he was pretty strong mark. Sub 3 seconds for 20 metres, so that's pretty good. Beep test, yeah, pretty decent result, and particularly given how young he was at the time. And again, same with the 3K, good result. So yeah, he was a really good athlete coming in. Goods, no testing results. He's someone where probably early days in watching Goods, I don't think he was the athlete that he became, but over the years he really became, at his height, a sensational athlete. So I think that really developed, but had Goods tested, I don't know if he would have necessarily dominated. That's just my suspicion. Enright, probably the best defender for the generation. So here I wanted to add a bit of difference, where we've got some rucks and quite a number of key forwards, key backs. I wanted a good bulk of mids, but I also wanted a few sort of different positions, different types, just to get a bit more of an all-round feel for some of the best players who play different roles, different ways, and how you don't necessarily have to be the greatest athlete, and the data's just showing it. But Enright, for me, best defender of sort of the last generation. So, running vert, nothing exceptional, below average, if anything. 22nd, is not sub 3, so nothing exceptional. Agility, yeah, decent enough without being sort of anything exceptional. And same with the beep test, fine result, nothing to really write home about. And yeah, he was of normal draft age. So look, would you pick Enright as an athlete? No, he wasn't an athlete, but despite that, well, look, he became one of the great rebounders and really had one of the most complete games as a defender. So look, you don't have to be too concerned about athleticism. If you can play, you can play. And he was picked from memory, if I recall correctly, in the 40s. So he was a mid-draft pick, so he wasn't an early pick. But yeah, if you're good enough to play, well, the athleticism isn't the be-all, end-all, and necessarily even that good of an indicator of upside if you look at an Enright. And same with Cyril, and this is where I come back to the mind-body connection. It was a bit like with Buddy, where he tested terribly in the 20-metre sprint and agility. Well, Cyril obviously is a great athlete, really quick. Probably had a little bit of a leap on him. I would have thought he'd test a bit better for the leap. This is a good running vert off his right, so that's pretty reasonable. But 20 meter sprint, looking at how quick he is in game, I would have thought he'd be closer to 2.9 than to sort of closer to 3 where he was. But look, obviously very quick, and sub 3 is still fast, so that's understandable. But the agility, I would have thought Cyril, great agility athlete, same with Buddy, but in the testing, well, it looks like he comes across as more of a below average agility athlete, which is really staggering. So you really have to consider, well, what's he doing in game and how's he play? Because the testing here, as with Buddy, just isn't consistent with his game. So you really have to question that and trust more so your observations of what they do on the field. Beep test, look, he's never been an endurance athlete, and fair enough, that's what you'd expect from Cyril, because he's more of a fast twitch guy, so it's more the speed, agility stuff, that's where he's going to dominate. But beep test, we've known that from watching him over the years. He's not that endurance athlete, and the 3K, well, being sort of 12 plus isn't great, so that's what you'd expect. Repeat speed, look, that's good for a repeat sprint, being around 24. Well, if you're a sub 25, you're pretty good, so good result from Cyril there. And that sort of shows, I guess, how he could do all the repeat efforts as a forward with all the repeat tackling and really going after guys. So that gives a bit of context there more than anything, rather than looking at this number and being wowed and thinking, oh, let's draft him off this. It's more a case of, let's look at him in game. Does he show that in game? Does he give those repeat efforts? If so, then that repeat sprint number is of some relevance. Toby Green, I just thought I'd include a different sort of forward as well. And Green tested pretty well overall. Running vert, pretty good. Obviously, he can only jump off his left, it looks like. So 20 meter sprint, look, not sub 3. For a small forward, you'd like sub 3, just having that speed, so then they can be more of a pressure player. And same with agility, you'd probably hope for more like 8.5 or closer to that marker. But look, it is what it is. Beep test is obviously got the endurance. So beep test 3K, actually the highest of all these results here in both categories, it looks like. So and look, as a junior, he was a midfielder, and he's someone where he had to transition to be a forward just to accommodate all of GWS's wonderful midfielders, because they just stockpiled midfielders and key position players. So it meant that the likes of Green had to play what at the time was out of position. But look, he's become a great forward, and good on him for, I guess, being able to transition to do that. And then you've got the repeat sprint, so you'd prefer him to be a bit quicker. So he's not quick, but it's more so, how does he move? Well, it's more so based on his endurance base. That's his real strength there. Next up, we'll have a look at some of those rookies that have achieved over the last 20 years 200 plus games. And I'm just sticking to those that I've really thought have had really strong careers, where any team, they'd be a clear best 22 player, and it'd be hard to debate. So Stephen Milne, no testing data. He was very agile. What his endurance testing would be, I doubt it would be all that good, and probably same with the vert sort of categories, really. I'm not sure how strong he would have been. Cox, we've mentioned him already, but didn't have that same endurance base that he developed over the years. So he's someone where, had he tested, it would have been pretty poor. And same with Jolly. He's someone where, even later in his career, when he established himself, he was never an athlete at all. But so no testing data there to confirm that, but that was his game. Quinton Lynch, vert's fine, 20 meter sprint fine, agility decent enough. But really his endurance was what let him down, where beep tests, only just hitting level 11 isn't a good result for anyone really. Even if it was a ruckman, you wouldn't be all that impressed. And then same with the 3K, you'd really hope for him to be at least sub 12, but he didn't have that endurance base. How much that cost him, look, again, I wasn't really following the draft at that time, but he's someone where, look, obviously great rookie success story, and he's had a fantastic career. Matthew Boyd, not an athlete, but when as a rookie, had a fantastic career. So you'll find a lot of these names, although they're not overly athletic, they've had fantastic careers. So again, if you really go through the names carefully, it really makes you think about whether truly athleticism is that strong of an indicator of upside. Bock we've got here, again, his running verts, all fine. 20 meter sprint, fine. Agility, actually quite good, being that sub 8.5, so that's pretty good. Beep test, decent enough result, and 3K again, decent enough result. So interesting, good athlete. Again, didn't follow him during the time of his draft, but obviously, other than injuries, he had a terrific career. Aaron Sandilands, look, no testing, mentioned him already. Ben Rutten, testing, certainly his vert, running vert, good results. Beep test, very good. But his 20-meter sprint agility, look, being a bigger guy, repeat sprint, I don't know how he would have gone, but I probably wouldn't have thought all that strongly. So it seems like he was pretty selective in his testing there. And I believe he did test the year before and didn't test all that strongly. So he's someone where he really improved his numbers, if I recall correctly. Brad Sewell, running vert, pretty good, but he was more of a ball-winning midfielder, so it didn't matter for all that much. Beep test, not a good result for a midfielder. You'd want certainly 13 plus for a mid, and he was never really quick, so speed and agility, look, I'm not surprised he didn't really want to test. So so again, another non-athlete. Patful, vert, pretty reasonable. Running vert, well, his vert wasn't all that good, but his running vert was pretty reasonable. 20-meter sprint, look, that's adequate enough. Agility, adequate enough. Beep test, yeah, fine. And 3K, look, okay enough. So, but yeah, look, Patful became a really good defender and, yeah, a really good piece. Maxwell, no testing data. Was he an athlete? No, he definitely wasn't an athlete, but became a great leader, just someone where he just really worked hard to get the most out of himself. So credit to Nick for becoming, I guess, a premiership captain at the end. So well done to him. Josh Gibson, I probably would have thought his running vert might be a little better than that. Obviously known as a third man up, he could intercept a bit as well. Speed, I probably thought he would have been a bit quicker than that. Agility, again, I would have thought he'd test a little better than that. So those are a bit surprising. Maybe he improved as he progressed in his career. But obviously testing didn't test all that strong given how I thought he was relatively athletic. Endurance, he wasn't an endurance athlete. So beep test, not a good result. And if he did the 3K, he wouldn't have gone all that well either, I can't imagine. Pierce, here's an example of someone where he actually tested really well. And in going through the top 10s before, we already saw Pierce features. So he tested really strongly. With the running verts, incredible running verts, but he was more of he used his speed in game, which obviously having that sort of speed is terrific, and that agility, well, terrific, and even pretty good in the beep test and 3K. So he had those running capabilities, which enabled him to, in part, be a good reason why he had a good career, but he really used those in game. But with the running vert, look, he wasn't much of he wasn't an aerial mark much, I wouldn't have thought, going off memory. So, look, it doesn't really matter that is that strong in those categories, but it's more so when you get into the speed, endurance, agility sort of categories that, yeah, look, any of those results are really positive because he's someone where he applied it in game, which is ultimately what matters. Morris, no testing data, so you can't really say much more. Lumumba, no testing data. He's someone where, for me, early days, he was incredibly mechanical and didn't really show much athleticism in game. But he's someone where I thought whether it was that he became more athletic over time and just worked on that, or whether it was more he worked on applying it in game, well, eventually he became a really good, I guess, run and carry defender. So, and as well as being able to shut down opponents. So, of course, if you're looking back at the results from then, he was Harry O'Brien. So you might have to look at a different name there. But good career. Heath Grundy, some really terrible results. That's a terrible vertical, honestly, and running vert, not much better either. So, obviously not much of a leaper, but very strong marks. So you don't always have to be a leaper to be successful, even in defence, where it can be quite handy. 20-meter sprint, not a good 20-meter sprint result. Agility, not a good result. Endurance, not good either. So, and look, he was of normal age. So, look, he's someone where obviously he got the most out of himself, developed into a really good player, but he was more of a strong defender, strong intercept marked. And so another example where, again, you don't have to be an athlete by any means to become certainly a really good key defender. So Matt Priddis, well, many of us know of him as a non-athlete, but obviously his endurance was his strength. So incredibly strong beep test results. So, and he was picked as a mature ager as well. So he was over 20 there. So he came out of the waffle. But yeah, agility. Look, agility was also fine, but the 20-meter sprint, that's where he really fell over and wasn't a strong performer at all. And then verts, well, that wasn't part of his game, so that's fine. But yeah, it's just, if you look at Priddis, well, he was someone where he could just win the football, play really good footballs, so you don't have to rely on any athletic data to really determine that he can play. Kieran Jack, look, you've got no testing results, so you can't really say too much there. Sam Jacobs, well, he was rookied by Carlton and then obviously shipped over to Adelaide later on as Carlton got too many rucks on their list. But yeah, look, reasonable data here. Running vert, decent enough. 20-meter sprint, look, being not even under 3.2 is pretty poor, even for a ruck. So yeah, look, obviously not an athlete. Being over 9 for agility, well, not agile at all. And then beep test, well, you'd want 12 plus, certainly, even as a ruckman. So yeah, certainly as a runner, he wasn't at all strong. And but yeah, look, even despite all that, he's become obviously an excellent ruckman and one of really, I could have even mentioned him on the tier group before that I had, where he wasn't really far behind those guys, almost a half tier behind for me. But yeah, look, he could have easily gone on that list. But yeah, it's interesting that obviously without that testing data, he went later, but he developed later and obviously terrific. Harbrow, he went as a rookie to Bulldogs and then obviously moved to Gold Coast later once they came about. But beep test, poor beep test result, particularly as I believe is sub 180. So yeah, look, you'd really hope for a better beep test result than 11.10. So that's not a great result, and maybe that impacted on where he went in the draft. Again, he's someone where he was drafted before I started really following the draft extensively, so I can't contribute to that story. Agility, is really agile in game, so it's quite surprising to see his agility not closer to sort of the 8.5 mark. Speed being sub 3, no surprise, and then verts, yeah, fair enough. But yeah, look, surprisingly poor testing from Harbrow. You'd think he'd be testing a little better, but he's someone where looking game, he's obviously quicker than his testing shows. You've got, and then Lonergan, he was redrafted. He was drafted several years earlier, but here's a case of where, look, it's not about the testing data in his case. It's about, even sometimes you can have guys delisted and sometimes they can really come back and really have a career. So it's just interesting, I guess, from that perspective to list him here, because clearly he belongs on this list as one of certainly this category of players, if not one of the better ones on this list. So Mumford, we've mentioned already, and then Bruce, no data, but yeah, look, he's obviously become terrific for Hawthorn as a forward. So yeah. And to provide some contrast, because we've already seen, of course, the very top athletic performers, I wanted to go through some of the interesting names of those that haven't necessarily tested as well as you would like, or that you would necessarily think. So they've had terrific careers, but yeah, look, there's some other sort of, I guess, oddities on the list. So Stefan Martin, so actually the lowest vertical on record. So that was quite something to say the least. And he wasn't even an 18-year-old testing there. So it just shows how far he's progressed. So credit to Stefan for putting in the work and becoming the beast that he has become and has been over his career. Running vert, look, nothing to write home about, but yes, certainly is standing vert, just obviously not very comfortable doing that. 20-meter sprint, look, what you'd expect from a ruck. Agility, similar story, and beat test again, pretty reasonable, but yeah, just the vert's a bit of a weird one. So, and then you can see him coming back the next year, so 2007, so this is when he got drafted. So his vert, he obviously put in the work and became a bit more comfortable with that. And then his running vert in both on his left and right improved. So yeah, that's something. And then look, you've got 20-meter sprint, again, improvement, agility, improvement, beat test, not much of an improvement. But yeah, look, with Martin, the key in his career has been that he's put in the work, he's improved, and you can really see from one year to the next how much is improved. So This is why I really look at rate of improvement as a really important criteria in assessing, particularly with ruckman, particularly with key position players, because they develop a bit later and come good later. Just into how high their upside is rather than, I guess, being an exceptional athlete. I don't care if they're getting a 37 centimetre vertical. I want to see them jumping up the next year, whether it's their numbers jumping up. If they're getting taller, that's cool. If they're getting stronger, that's cool. If their results are getting better in any of these categories, well, that's nice. Doesn't matter really which categories, but you really just want to be seeing guys improve in some respects to really, I guess, give an indicator that there is upside in them. And Tom Rockcliffe is another one where, look, his testing data horrible. Vertical, I think, was actually the second worst all time on the list. So and then running verts, well, absolutely none. 20-meter sprint, terrible. Agility, not even sub 9, so that's horrible for a midfielder. Beep test, again, terrible. You'd want 13 plus for a mid. So, but yeah, looking at Rockcliffe, well, what could he do? Well, he could win the ball and he could really play. If you actually watched his games, well, he was a terrific footballer. So, and then he came back to the combine the next year, and look, again, not good results, but he improved. So again, look at the improvement. So a good jump up in his vertical, running verts, improved. Obviously he prefers his right leg over his left, so that developed. 20-meter sprint, look, a little bit of improvement, but that's fine. You want to just see little incremental improvements, even if it isn't their areas of strength. Agility, a little better, not as bad. Beep test, much better. 13 plus is very respectable. And then 3K, look, you'd probably want sub 12 ideally, but yeah, look, it is what it is. And repeat sprint, you'd want better than 26 typically. So yeah, look, particularly for a mid. So obviously not quick and not an athlete, but obviously a terrific ball winner, really knows where to go to win it. So you don't have to be an athlete to do so well. And Rockcliffe, he was a preseason draft pick, so look, it doesn't really matter where you're drafted. You can far exceed it even if you aren't an athlete. And Paddy Ryder, so he's a sensational athlete, but then the results are a bit counterintuitive, where it's a bit surprising to see. So his vertical, you'd think he'd have a much higher vertical than that. And same with his running verts. So it's something like, well, what's going on here with Paddy? So and he's someone where he's a dominant tap ruckman, yet he's a sub 200 ruckman. So it's a bit of a weird one there. 20-meter sprint, look, you'd probably expect closer to 3 for him just because he is so athletic and looks so quick out on the field. So you'd think he'd be probably closer to that 3 mark than 310 mark at least. Agility, good agility, and that's not surprising watching him. Beep test, look, as a ruckman, fair enough. You'd hope he'd be closer to 13, but and look, at the time, Ryder wasn't necessarily seen as a ruck. He was seen more as a key positioner, and then he was later thrown in the ruck by Essendon just because out of necessity, and he actually held up pretty well to everyone's surprise. So 3K, yeah, look, reasonable enough for a ruckman. You can't get too upset with that being sub 12. So. But yeah, just looking at some of the testing, it's really interesting, whether it's just the 20-meter sprint a little worse than expected, but particularly the verticals and running verts. Well, so testing isn't the be-all, end-all. Again, Ryder proves it in-game by leaping over ruckman most week and winning the tap-outs most weeks, even though he's over 30, even though he's sub 200 centimetres. It doesn't matter. It's just got the ruck craft down and it doesn't really matter. And Tippin Woody, he was someone where I actually really liked him in his draft year, and he just kept being overlooked, unfortunately. But he always provided that manic forward pressure, and yeah, look, he's someone where I guess people would have learnt from by now to really not overlook those lively Delhouses, Tippin Woodies, those types. You really have to consider the impact they have, because they're impacting games, whether you're watching the under-18 champs, whatever level they're playing, and I guess now recruiters are looking more for that now, which is great to see. So looking at his verticals, not much of a vertical, but looking at the speed and agility, you'd expect better from Tippin Woody. He's really fast, but again, he must be one of those mind-to-body connection guys where, look, he must really have that to him. And then beat test, not a good result, fair enough, he's a fast twitch athlete, and repeat sprint, well, very good. So again, that's probably a good indicator into why his forward pressure is as good as it is. So that's probably the only useful indicator out of all these numbers with Tip and Woody. So, and then looking the next year, well, again, you've got a good step up. Vert's improving a little bit. Running vert here off his left has improved. 3 second 20 meter, well, that's an improvement. So he might be someone where he hasn't had much testing practice potentially, you could, I guess, suggest. And yeah, well, 3 seconds is fine, but you'd think he'd be a bit quicker than 3 seconds even, where Tip and Woody's really quick. And agility, good agility test, fair enough. Didn't need to do a repeat sprint, we already knew he was good. Michael Walters, an interesting one. So all he did was really the vert. So I don't know if he got hurt during his draft, but that's just a weird result. And then repeat sprint. Well, you'd think his repeat sprint, being as quick as he is, would be much higher than that, but nope. And he's someone where, look, he developed later, but yeah, you'd expect much better than that from him. So yeah, interesting stuff. Brody Myercheck, he was someone where he had a great draft year. He was really draftable, played really well in defense, good interceptor, just natural footballer. But what put everyone off was the 3.38 over 20 meters. But coming back as a mature ager, yeah, he's established himself for Collingwood as a best 22 player as a rookie selection in more recent years. So yeah, credit to him for keeping at it. And yeah, I guess a note to recruiters, don't overlook guys if they're terrible in any particular category or not standout athletes. And look, being 9+ in agility, well, that's not a good result, but so what? He's been fine, but he's got the endurance. So having the endurance, it hasn't really mattered. Again, repeat sprint, not good, but beep test, 3K, look, they're pretty good times. So based off that, probably I wouldn't be as worried about Myercheck as recruiters, but he's someone where, look, you either pick him based on his game or overlook him. And look, at the time, I didn't have a strong enough understanding of how the testing data worked either, and how it really correlated to upside, how it correlated to on-field stuff. And now that I've sort of really looked through the data over the years, really come to understand it, I realize that if I see a 20-meter sprint like this or an agility test like this, I don't really care. If they're doing it on the field, that's all I need to know. Tom Lynch. So, and now with the last ones, we've got really 4 guys who are later bloomers, where they grew a bit later. And for me, this is really where I see upside in recruits. And I think this is a really important one to look at. So Lynch, if you look at his vert, running vert, nothing exceptional. 20-meter sprint, well, that's a horrible 20-meter sprint time. And even the agility, well, that's very poor. But look, being that later bloomer, really, I guess, being able to grow into his body a bit later, there's still the upside in those categories. And the beep test, very strong result in the beep test and 3K. So being strong in these categories, I wouldn't be at all worried about these two. So and then repeat sprint, well, being sub 25, that's pretty reasonable. So yeah, and then you've got Jack McRae. So we've got some interesting results here where he was obviously very quick in his draft year, sub 3, and you could really see it in game in that sort of Pendlebury-like weight where he's really got that mind-to-body connection. And then again with the agility, so sub 8.5, so that's really good. But beep test, not a good beep test. You'd really want 13+, so don't have that put you off. Is someone where in game he really improved over the course of the season and he kept growing. So yeah, look, don't put too much weight onto that. Really consider that he's got more improvement and he can improve in those areas when they're still growing like that. And then repeat sprint, again, not a good result there. So yeah, Bont, yeah, look, running vert, that's fine, but 20-meter sprint, well, he's a really athletic mid. So having sort of that burst out of stoppages, you'd think he'd be better than a 3.2. You'd think he'd be closer to 3. But again, he was a late bloomer, and he grew a lot in his draft years with these other guys. And yeah, so you really have to, I guess, understand that context. Agility, good. So being that 190 centimeter guy with this sort of agility, well, that's a good result. And obviously he had the endurance as well. So good beep, good 3K, really excellent in both categories. And then repeat sprint looked pretty good. So it sort of makes a bit of sense. But yeah, again, if you see this sort of result in 20 meter, don't stress it. If they're this strong in endurance, well, then as long as they're showing some sort of semblance of speed in game, which Bont did, you could see some of that sort of mobility and run and burst. Well, that's more than fine. So don't get too scared off by that 20 metre. And Cripps is a similar story. We're not an athlete. Running vert's fine. Regular vert's pretty terrible. But late bloomer grew a lot in his draft year and sort of those 2 years leading up. And he's someone where his football really improved over the course of the season. So again, you really have to weight that very heavily in the upside. Although his birthday, unlike some of the other guys who had later year birthdays, which does in some respects help towards having more improvement in them, with the Cripps, even though he had an early year birthday, just being that late improver, look, there's still a lot of upside in those types, and he kept growing. So when he was drafted, he was probably about 191, 192. Well, now he's 195, 196. So when you're still growing, well, hey, there's more improvement in you. Repeat sprint, look, nothing exceptional. 3K, not great for a mid. Beat test, again, not great for a mid. You'd want probably a little better, but still reasonable enough. Agility, reasonable, and probably quite good for his height. But yeah, the 20 metre, well, yeah, so don't stress too much on the 20 metre if it's not up to that elite level, or even if it's really this poor. Well, yeah, nothing to lose sleep on if Bont and Cripps are this low, and yet they're having the careers they are as two of the better mids in the game at the moment. Well, you really need to take that into consideration and not put too much weight on the testing. Now for the 5 key learnings. And these are really the things you need to really be looking at when assessing upside. So you really need to look at their on-field improvement. Are their numbers improving? Is their frequency of impact improving? So whether it's a guy where maybe at the start of the year they had 5 moments per game on average where they'd be impacting games, and now they're doing it 10 times a game pretty consistently. They're the sort of things you look for, and numbers you really want to see from year to year. Well, have they gone from a 1 goal a game guy to a 3 goal a game guy, or have they made the jump from 15 disposals a game to more than 25 a game? Really, they're the indicators for me that I look at, where if their numbers are on the improve and tracking up from year to year, that's a great indicator that they've got some potentially more improvement to come. Whereas if a guy just achieves the same numbers every year as a junior, well, it's likely based on really the history of those players that I've analysed in the past that you're not going to see too much upside. And then are they still growing? So here you're looking for your Bonts, your Patrick Cripps, all those sort of guys who grow later, even Tim English more recently, who some fans like more than others. But yeah, look, any of those sort of guys where they grow later, it's a real indicator that they're going to improve a lot more, where they've still got their bodies to grow into, so there's a lot of upside there in those sort of cases. And then how to use testing data. So you really need to use the testing data to explain what you see out on the field, and if their athletic testing data improves from where they were last year or the start of the year, because that's where it's really useful to sort of, I guess, determine whether there is that upside or not. Because if those numbers are improving, well, it shows that they're either putting in the work or that their bodies are coming along and developing physically to suggest there's potentially a bit more improvement in them. And then really that's the indicator for upside. And then from there, you've got the athletic testing is not an indicator of upside. So whether you're Joel Wilkinson winning the 20 metre sprint, repeat speed, if you're going really well in the endurance testing, I couldn't care less. If you can't apply it on field, that's what I'm looking for. Because the athletic testing is really there to support, well, can you show something on field? If not, well, it's not relevant really to me. So I really look purely at what they do in game, and then it's just the athletic testing just, I guess, is there for a bit of context. And if you've got historic data, well, then that's where you can look at, well, is it improving or not? And otherwise, another key is don't ignore the guys who are already great footballers. So maybe it's a Sam Mitchell where he's been playing in the VFL and look, he's racking it up, he's using it really nicely. You really have to look beyond just what the testing data would say. If they can play, well, don't ignore them. Or a Matt Prittis, same story. And then you can even have guys who are heavier in build where they look too overweight, where it could be a Shane Mumford or a Jeremy McGovern where they're overweight, but my gosh, they've got games. So you really have to understand the footballer, understand, do they have game? Can they play? Can they impact games? And if so, then really you need to be drafting them as opposed to an athlete who has no idea how to apply it in game. If you guys have made it to the end, well, congratulations. That's really impressive sitting through that very long presentation. But yeah, if you managed to get through it, make sure you give me a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already. And make sure you share my contents, then others can be educated. And let me know in the comments section below, is there any correlation between athletic testing and upside? Or I guess, how right or wrong am I on the topic? Anyway, thanks guys. See you in the next video.